All right, so my name's Shannon Deminick. I work for Umbraco. Today, in this session, we're going to talk about the road to V8 and beyond. And that's the road starting now, not from version 1. It's from 7.3 to V8 and beyond. And that's actually a British car, I think. And in true format style, this podium is far too tall for myself. Okay, so let's start here. We'll talk about what we're going to talk about in this session here, the intro purpose. So we'll talk about what releases we're going to be considering before V8. I've said considering there because I didn't want to make this a super official roadmap, even though it probably will be. We'll talk about what their features are. We'll talk about something called Umbraco Deploy and something called version 8, which people may have been discussing about what that is, and what's beyond version 8 and some crazy ideas that I've been working on in the last year. So first of all, let's talk versions. So we have 7.3.1. That was released yesterday, which is great news. The next release that we're going to make is REST API and identity extensions. This is something that's been worked on for a little bit of time, kind of in the background, and we'll discuss this a bit more. And as of today, we've also talked about a 7.3.2, which is a community release that will get out there as well. Sorry, I meant 7.3.2, yeah. 7.4 beta release will probably be out soon. 7.4 final release, guesstimate probably November-ish. We'll talk about when Umbraco Deploy version 1 is going to be released, and then a 7.5 version, then a 7.6 version, a version 8, and then what's after that. There's probably a few things in between, but this is sort of the roadmap as we see it so far. So 7.3.1, that was released yesterday. It contains a bunch of bug fixes and some minor API enhancements that came along with 7.3.0. First ones were, so 35 actual issues fixed, and there's 3 new features added, which is kind of cool. So in 7.3.0, we introduced ASP.NET Identity, which is the authentication authorization system for the back office. A few people have tried out 7.3.0 and decided that their membership provider custom login didn't work anymore. So we've talked to the community about this, and with a bit of feedback, we've made this much easier to implement in 7.3.1, sorry, with only a few lines of code. So this is basically if you need to authenticate your user, maybe against Active Directory or something else, but you still want your user data stored in Umbraco. So we've made that. The link to content type from content, this was a community pull request. So that's when you're in debug mode and you're working on a piece of content, and a lot of times you have to go back and forth between the content type editor and the content to check what your property type aliases are and all sorts of things like that. This just makes it a bit easier when you're looking at a piece of content. You can go to the generic properties tab and then just click on the content type button. That'll navigate you to the specific content type for that item. The other one, which is also a PR from the community on the same notion, is when I am in debug mode and I want to see what the property type alias is of any property, I can just hover over the property name in the content editor and it'll show me the alias, which is just kind of handy for developing. Another thing that we've added is some documentation. So what I just mentioned about the identity extensions or the identity fixes, we've added some documentation to our. I think it might be waiting to be pulled in by Aruna, but it's there. And then 7.3.2, which we discussed this morning, is going to be a full community release. So that's all the PRs that you guys have contributed yesterday. and probably a bunch of PRs that we've been meaning to pull in that we haven't done yet. So hopefully that'll be out, I don't know, I'm just at a guess, a week or two, because it should be pretty simple. Next up, okay, so 7.4. Niels and Per talked about this morning, and it's quite a big release as far as workflow goes. So we have a new content type editor. There's a lot of UX polish, so everything is quite consistent across the board. What Niels and Per didn't talk about this morning was a new media library, which I'll show you in a second. Another feature that we've been discussing is to limit content versions. I'm going to be honest right now, I'm not sure if it's going to make it to 7.4, but hopefully it will. And that's so that your version history doesn't keep building and building and building. So we can say for the home page document type, we only want to keep 10 versions. So it's in 7.4 now. It'll definitely be between 7.4 and 7.5. The other main one, which was just discussed, is the grid search. Now this one's quite important for obvious reasons, because right now we just store a big blob of JSON. So content type editor, the new list view and media type library. So when you went to a folder before, we had a folder browser, and that would show you a bunch of icons for the media that was inside of there. And that was kind of handy. You could drag and drop a few files here and there, and it would show you the upload progress, but you couldn't really do much more. At the same time, when you looked at all those icons, you could easily consider that could be sort of a list view at the same time as well. So what we've done is we've gone ahead and made that happen, and that's all with Mads and Per's work. I'll show you some screenshots in a second. Courier support has been updated, will be updated. Right now, Courier tries to use GUIDs wherever possible so that we can sync content between different environments. Unfortunately, up to date, content types, media types, member types are all matched based on an alias. So if you change a document type alias and try to sync it with Courier, chances are it'll just create a new one. So in 7.4, we're going to use the GUIDs that already exist for content types to do its transfer. Another thing I didn't mention before was a console boot manager. We'll talk about something called a link pad provider in a little bit. But this means that in the core, we can release some code that if you wanted to write a console app, you could boot Umbraco with only a few lines of code to then have access to all the Umbraco backend services. So talking to the database, doing data manipulation, things like that. This has actually been a request for quite some time in the community, and this is a way that we can structure document types, media types, member types, data types into folders instead of actually having parent document types just to say that this belongs in a certain category. So in 7.4, in the content type tree, you could say, create a new folder for, I don't know, Australia. Maybe you have different document types for different regions, and then you can organize your document types in those folders. This doesn't mean that they inherit from different document types. It just means that they're categorized in the UI. So it works quite well. Same with data types. Many people might have 100 data types, and instead of a giant tree, you can just have sections, so it's easier to navigate. So that's a cool new feature. It's actually pretty simple to implement, and I guess it's been a long time coming. This is another community edition that we've already pulled into 7.4, which is a decimal data type. I don't know if you guys have noticed, but Umbraco for properties stores 4 different types. There's integer, datetime, string, and long string. If you were to store a decimal number, you'd have to store that under a string. This means that if you wanted to write SQL queries against that specific data structure, it's on a string-based query, not a real decimal-based query. So now that supports that, and if you write a property type or a property editor that has the decimal type, that'll go into that one particular field. So that's already in there, which is great. The next up is what was just discussed, indexing and searching on the grid. This is a bit of a complex thing because the grid's data is all JSON. So there's a few different ways that we can conquer this. Still yet to figure out the best plan of attack, but It might involve either custom Lucene analyzers or just splitting out the field into multiple fields. The latest examined version actually supports storing a single or multiple values in a single field, so this might solve that problem as well. So we haven't solved this problem yet, but we will solve it before 7.4 is out. So here's some, oh, that's terrible. Screenshots of some of these new features. These were demoed this morning. So this is the doc type editor. We have nice inline editing. We have data type creation and configuring. We have composition, sort of drag and drop, and it's all just really nice to use and look at. Reordering, again, is drag and drop. And then we have a nice sort of template selection editor as well. This next one you haven't seen, and unfortunately, I don't know if this is going to do it any justice. But this is the new sort of media library I was talking about. This might look a bit familiar because before the folder browser would show you thumbnails, but this is way smarter. This is using CSS only to build the grid. Before it was using a lot of weird JavaScript calculations to figure out the size of images to fit in there. This is all using FlexGrid. I'm not a CSS guy. To resize everything, and it just works dynamically, which is really great. The next up is we have different views for the list editor. Now, the list editor is shared between content, media, and members, remember. So by default, we'll ship the media list editor with the thumbnail grid to be displayed by default, but you can easily just click this drop-down list and then select the list view, which is really handy. The other cool part is you can add these custom views as much as you want, which is just an Angular view. So this is configurable at the data type level. So that last one there doesn't actually exist with what we ship in. I just made one. It was just a text box, didn't do anything. But you can create Angular views for that, and then you can just ingest all the data that the model gives you. The other one is a multiple select, which is pretty handy. So when you're looking at all these thumbnails, you can multiple select any number of images or files. You can actually shift-click and select a range. And the cool part is, you can't see that, but there's two tiny little icons up there that say move and delete. So there's bulk actions with multiple selections in the media editor as well, for both the list view and the icon editor. Metadata, so when you hover over any one of those images, it'll show you a bit of a list of info, and then drag and drop folders. This is pretty cool. Before you could drag and drop just individual files or a selection of files. Now you can drag and drop entire folders, which contain subfolders, which contain subfolders of all the images, and it will just get put into Umbraco. So that's already built. That's in 7.4. You can test it now if you get the latest from GitHub. The next thing we'll talk about is the REST API. If anyone was at Code Garden, they would have heard a lot about this. I don't want to go into tons of detail here because it'll take up all the time, but the REST API needs to be released because we were supposed to release it with 7.3, and it hasn't been done yet. So when is this going to be released? Now. It's actually live right now. It was actually live yesterday. Nobody was paying attention. Anyway, continue clapping. It's fine. So briefly describe what the REST API is. It's Umbraco-supported REST API that we're releasing out of band. It supports content, media, members, and relations, queries, basically all the CRUD operations. It's based on something called the HAL specification. You can read all sorts of stuff about this online and also at the GitHub repository for the REST API, which I'll show you in a second. Out of band, it basically means that we release the core, and then we can release the REST API with different versions whenever we want. This means that we can deliver updates for the REST API and the core at different times, which means it's way more flexible for us and better for you guys in the long run. The first release we've actually called 0.9.0, and the reason is because version 1.0 will have breaking changes. We just wanted to preempt that. The reason is it works really great right now, but the security model for the REST API right now is only back office users. And that works really great for some circumstances, but doesn't work really great for other ones, such as app development. It can still work, but that means you have to create a different back office user for every person that's going to use your app, which isn't really ideal, but we needed to get this out so people can start using it. In version 1, we'll have a way more flexible security model. It'll work with members. You'll be able to configure it up front when you install this to tell what members have access to this REST API, and it'll be fully extensible, so you can do kind of whatever crazy authentication and authorization that you want. So here's I'll put the slides up online, so you don't have to write this all down now, but there's some documentation on installing the REST API already. Runa needs to pull in, I don't know where he is, needs to pull in that to be visible on our, but it's on GitHub right now. That's the GitHub address for the REST API, so you can have a look at the code. There's documentation there, and it's already on NuGet, so you can install it onto 7.3.0. The next one, which hasn't really been discussed much at all, is something called identity extensions. Again, like the REST API, we're going to release this out of band, and it's a very small package that's on NuGet. The REST API actually references as well, and it's just a way to make developing against ASP.NET Identity and Umbraco a bit easier. Out of the box, it has an extensible token auth provider, which you can use, and it's extensible. This one that we ship with is very simple, and it's just based on ASP.NET Identity, but you can extend it for any of your auth needs, because auth is super difficult, and I mean, the sky's the limit with it, but this should get you started. Included in the package when you install it is lots of snippets. It installs a lot of code files and installs a lot of READMEs for you to look through, which also includes a lot of online documentation. So if you install identity extensions, it'll get you started on the road to sort of custom authentication and authorization. That's the GitHub address there, and you can install the package via NuGet as well. Again, we released that yesterday. So now I'm just going to do a quick demo of it, and hopefully it works. The first thing I want to show you, or the only thing I want to show you for this demo, is using identity extensions to install a Google Auth provider for the back office. So with that in mind, you would have to know that you have to go to Google Development Console, and you have to set up an API. So I've just put a screenshot here. You can copy all that if you want, but I'm going to delete it soon. This is a way for you to set up OAuth for Google. It gives you a client ID, a client secret, and all sorts of things like that. So let's have a quick look at getting this working. Nope. Yep. Oh yeah, this sucks. I did this last time. Now I got to develop up there, not on this screen. Nope. All right, so we'll go to Umbraco here. And we can log in. Oh, wait. And we're logged in, so that's great. So let's go over to Visual Studio. And we'll try to install this package. Okay, so install package, Umbraco. So that should just install. I wish I could make this bigger for you. Once that's installed, then we can just sort of have a quick look at the code snippets that it installs. Slowly, slowly, keep going. This actually is totally on my computer as well, so I can't blame the Wi-Fi. So when you install this, we get a nice little README here. Nope, that doesn't work. There you go. Too much. All right, so next time I do a demo, I'm going to learn to not do it on the second screen. Anyway. This tells you a whole bunch of information about code snippets and where to find the stuff that's installed. You can see that in app start, I don't know if everyone can see that back there, but there's an app start folder with a few classes in here. Each one of these classes contains some documentation on how to get started with identity, contains a bunch of code snippets and whatnot. What this is telling you, though, is if you want to modify the startup, you need to change the OWIN startup class. OWIN might be familiar to some, but not to others. Not to worry, you don't need to know everything about it. Just read the docs, and you should be fine. But what we want to do is in 7.3.1, there's an app setting down here, which is OWIN app startup. Ooh. And that's using the default. That's what we ship with. So we're going to change that to standard so that we can sort of hijack the startup of it. Cool, there we go. And if you see over here, there's a class called Umbraco Standard OWIN Startup. So we can have a quick look there. And it's got a bunch of inline documentation, which you can read through when you install this package. So the next thing we want to do is we want to install another package, which is identityextensions.google. Online, and I'll show you in a sec, there's a bunch of different packages we have. We have identity extensions, we have Azure AD provider, we have a Google provider, a Microsoft provider, and a Facebook provider, all up on NuGet, so it should be super easy to sort of integrate what you want with OAuth. So once that's installed, again, we get a nice README. It's got a bunch of documentation here. So we're going to copy this little snippet, go back to our custom startup class, paste that in, and I have my data here. Cool. So let's start that up. We'll go back into our back office, refresh. My computer's not plugged in, so it's slow. That's my excuse. Cool, so I don't know if you've seen this before, but now we have this cool little provider thing in there that we installed the Google provider. What I want to do is link my account. So we'll do that. This goes to Google. I'm going to link my Shannon Deminick account. And there we go. So the cool part is once it's linked, I can log out, and now we have this as well. So I'm just going to log in. And there you go. So that's OAuth done in like a few lines of code. So that's pretty simple. Here we go. OK, so the next step, this thing called Umbraco Deploy. You guys have probably heard of something called Courier. We're basically going to take everything we've learned from Courier and rebuild it. There's been a lot of stuff that we've learned from Courier. We've learned how crazy intricate it can be with finding out all the dependencies between content, media, you name it. There's a lot of stuff to think about, where it can go wrong, where it can go right. We're actually going to spend the next few months and rebuild it from scratch. And the cool part about that is that's mostly a core integration type thing. So why are we doing this? First off, Courier uses nhibernate. the core doesn't use in Hibernate, but Courier does. This is sort of a legacy thing from a version 5 decision that was made. But we want to get rid of this because it's a second data layer on top of a data layer that doesn't need to be there. Adds a lot of bulk, and it's really hard to keep updating with the way the core is progressing. It contains a bunch of legacy code, and in fact, a lot of the code in Courier is copied from core because the Courier core doesn't reference Umbraco core, which is totally crazy, I know, but that's sort of how it's been due to legacy reasons. So the new version will actively reference core and will use all the core APIs in there. The other reason we need to change it is every time we release a new version, a minor version, 7.3, 7.4, there are slight database changes made, and we need to then re-update Courier to support those database changes, but then we also have to make sure that it's backwards compatible with the previous version. So it becomes kind of a pain in the butt. So we want to make it not a pain in the butt in the future. The other problem with Courier at the moment is the code has just been created sort of progressively over the years, maybe not with the best practices in mind, and it's not exactly the most unit testable structure. So we need to fix this. We're going to build it from the ground up, as mentioned. We are going to use best practices, test-driven development. We are going to put IOC in there, and everything's going to be built sort of with dependency injection. You guys don't have to worry about this, but when we build it that way, it means it will be built correctly and testable. The other limitations that Courier currently has is GUIDs. That's sort of a core update, so that's why Umbraco Deploy isn't just one product, it's a core product. I'm just going to guess maybe 40% of Umbraco Deploy, maybe 50, is actually just core updates, which is really good for everyone. So let's get GUIDs on everything so that we can use them when we send content up. There's also the notion of send versus sync. Come and see me after if you want to know more about that. That's the notion of sending data but not overwriting stuff that might not be under a child. It's a totally crazy thing, but it's something that a lot of problems with Courier happen now because everyone thinks that they're just sending content when it's actually syncing. So syncing, on the other hand, is I'm going to put this content tree over there, and it's going to end up being exactly the same, which means it's going to undo moves and deletions on the destination. Content versus infrastructure means that we will treat content and media different than we treat infrastructure, which is the way that UAS currently works today. And it makes sense. Hashing is also a big part about Courier. And it's a bit of an overhead because we have to recalculate hashes for every single content type, document type, content item, property type, you name it. What we're going to do is we're going to hash those things up front, and that's going to be in the core, in the database. That means when we compare things between environments, it's basically instantaneous. And as I mentioned, all this stuff is going to be in the core. So we're going to put the APIs directly in there, and if anyone's super game enough, once Umbraco Deploy is out, maybe you don't like the UI or something, you could, in theory, use just the Umbraco core to recreate what Umbraco Deploy will be, because the APIs will be in there for you to use. And now, when is this happening? Right now. This is happening as of 2 weeks ago, basically. I mean, we can go even further back than that. Per and I sort of spent a week together, and we drew up a lot of stuff on the walls in the office in Odense in Denmark. In the last couple of weeks, Klaus and Stefan have rehashed that and reiterated those ideas into something that they can work with. And going forward, Stefan's already started writing sort of skeleton structures for the software so that we can base that on for the next couple months, which is awesome. So that's coming next few months, and that's in active development. So 7.5 was briefly mentioned this morning. 7.5 is going to be a reality, and probably going to look at, I guess, first quarter of next year. It's going to include these features, which we'll talk about in a second. But the most important part about this is that this is going to be, hopefully, a full-fledged community-driven release. What that means is all these features and everything that we want in there, we're going to write up specs for it. We're going to put these up on the tracker. We're going to hope that some of you guys can pick up some of these tasks and run with them. And we'll be more than happy to assist, aid, help out, respond with feedback, and help you guys make these for everybody, because these are all almost easy to be done. So this is our goal, and we want to make this a full community release. So the first thing up is 301 redirect management. Currently, the way this is done is using packages. It's actually not a very difficult thing if you think about what 7.2 and 7.3 offer. If we have a custom database table that tracks old URLs, we create something called an iContent finder to look at those old URLs if nothing matches, and we define it, then we just either redirect with a 301 to what it used to be. It's actually a pretty simple task, but I'm saying pretty simple nowadays. Maybe before it wasn't as easy. But with 7.3, it should be not a lot of code. Document locking, this used to exist in a package a long time ago, but hasn't been around for quite some time. So we're going to bring it back because we think it's important, but we're going to do it in a much nicer way with SignalR. And that means that if you have editors that are working on the same content simultaneously, they'll get notified that another editor is currently working on it, and we'll have some options that you can lock the document and not let somebody else work on it. This is more of a UI thing, less of a back office thing, because to do that in C# code to lock a database record is a bit more insane. This is more a UI thing. But with real-time notification in SignalR, we want to put some APIs in the core that everyone can actually use and integrate with. So if you have a property editor that needs real-time notification with somebody else that's on that property type editor, we should make that possible. Previously, we discussed putting SignalR in the core, and we said, no, it's got way too many dependencies, things like OWIN and all the other OWIN dependencies, but we have ASP.NET Identity in there, which already references all of those. So we already have them all in there. Adding SignalR to the core is only, I think, 2 assemblies. Health check. This has actually been in the works for some time. There's already a spec on the issue tracker, and some community members have been working on it. You guys might have remembered UGoLive. This is the replacement for that, but on steroids. So it's going to be fully pluggable. You can write your own plugins for it. You can check whatever you want. It's going to have a dashboard in there, and we can categorize sort of each level. And it'll be green for good, red for not good, maybe a yellow for warning or something. We can also have actions associated with each item that says, you know, fix. So some examples might be, you know, is my indexes in sync? If they're not, it might be red. You can click a button that says fix. Do I have other data inconsistencies? This might happen if you upgrade from really old versions of Umbraco. Is debugging enabled? You might want to have a warning on that if you don't want debugging enabled. Permissions checks, file permissions checks, all sorts of things like that. I mean, the sky's the limit. Because this can be a pluggable system, that means you guys can all create different health checks along the way. Nested repeated content was also talked about, so let's get that in the core. It's a package right now. We will take that package, we'll look at what code is in there and what needs to be done to put it in the core so that we don't have to hack around too many things. I don't think there's going to be too much to be changed with this package, but it's worth noting it does have limitations. We just need to document that. In version 8, this will still be part of the core, but in version 8, we will do it in a slightly different way with sort of the notion of, we call them schemas. So you have a content type, which defines a bunch of properties and contains a bunch of other metadata that we don't need for nested content. So instead, we'll have a schema, which is a mini content type, which a content type can inherit from. That's sort of the V8 goal for nested repeated content. Apart from that, though, it's basically ready to get in there. Moving on quickly, so we got 7.6. This is something that hasn't been talked about at all. There's only a few things in here, and again, it's kind of consistent with 7.5, that this is going to be community-driven. So we'll write specs again for all of these things, and hopefully some of you, many of you can pick these up and we'll help you out with the development of it. Template editor updates. So this one's called the template editor experience. So we're going to focus on that. What we want with the template editor is a few things. One is tabs. Wouldn't it be awesome to have the template editor kind of work like Google Chrome or Firefox or whatever, so you can edit multiple files at once? I mean, that's pretty simple. It's kind of UI sugar. It should be relatively easy to do. The other one is revamping the actual editor itself. Whoops. Currently, we have CodeMirror in there, which works great, but we have an option to maybe swap that out for something called Ace Editor. We have to sort of see which one is better for what we want, because potentially, if we can create some easy APIs for this, we could have IntelliSense in the editor in the back office. That'd be super cool. What's lacking already right now is snippets that used to be in the web forms editor. Also just easier embedding of macros and all that sort of nice UI. iSearchable tree. This has actually been in the core for quite a while. It hasn't really been integrated into anything. And it's actually kind of a simple notion. In the back office right now, when you do a search, it searches based on the trees of the active section that you have loaded. So right now, if you search in content for content, it'll show you content. Media for media, members for members. That's easy. But when you go to the settings section, you'll notice the search bar doesn't really exist. And that's because it detects that none of the trees in there are iSearchable tree. So what we want to do is make the entire back office searchable based on section. So if I go to the settings section, I can still search on homepage, and it'll return me a result. Yes, there's a document type called homepage, but it'll search that entire section. What that requires is just implementing iSearchable tree for all the trees in those sections. Unfortunately, what that means is upgrading all those trees in those sections to the 7 format instead of the 6, which is something that just needs to be done. But these are not hard tasks. So that would just make the back office experience all that much better. The next cool feature is something that Niels created, I think, a couple of years ago, called Search Builder and Saved Searches. I can't really explain this to you unless I show you some awesome photos from Niels. So this is the simple idea. I don't know if you can see that, but essentially, let's say we have a text field. I can start typing country, and it'll show me what I want to select, and I can select, say, United States, and then it'll pop up, oh, you want to search states. Which one do you want? And it's kind of like a faceted search where you get to pick what you want. And once you get that, you have the possibility of saving how that search actually gets executed. So these are some awesome diagrams. This is how Niels architects things. So we build and save searches with a name. That's on the left, by the way, if you couldn't figure it out. And then we can use your searches with the name. So I'll translate that. That's actually a Razor script up there. It says for each var something in Umbraco.saved searches latest news. So let's say I saved a search called latest news, then I can get the search results just with a string using the Umbraco helper. So that would make all of your search experiences much nicer because you can predefine what you want to search on, and then you don't have to put all this logic into your views. So that's another cool feature that we want to do for 7.5. I don't know if I'm going fast or not. Hopefully not. Let's get on to V8. I do have a lot of slides in here. So V8 is a lot of stuff. It's going to be a lot of work. It's sort of separated into a couple different categories of features. We have the end user experience features, and then we have the sort of the developer features, which we can talk about in a second. So this is sort of the gist of V8, but we'll go into detail of each one. V8 is the version that I personally have been dreaming of. It's achieving the goal, and I don't know if anyone knows about what the goal is, but it's actually been documented on Hour for like 3 or 4 years. I don't know if anyone's ever seen this before, but the goal is to ship the Umbraco project with only a few DLLs. That's Umbraco.core, Umbraco.web, Umbraco.web UI. Client is just a project in there, and Umbraco tests is a project in there. So that's what we want the solution to look like, and when we ship it, you only get a few DLLs. And we want to get rid of all of that legacy code that has been there for, I don't know, 10 years? That is the goal. That's the ultimate geek goal of mine. So legacy cleanout, this is the hard one, because it takes a lot of time to clean out legacy, because it's just weaved and embedded all throughout that code base. So that would be awesome. These assemblies will actually be gone. The business logic one that you guys love to hate. CMS, controls, which actually doesn't do anything right now. Data layer, editor controls also doesn't do anything in V7. Interfaces is an odd one because it contains about 10 interfaces that are weaved through the code but never used. Macro engines also doesn't do anything right now, and Umbraco providers is legacy and shouldn't be used. So in theory, removing all these should be easy, but unfortunately, there's a lot of stuff still referencing those, so it takes a while to get through. But it will be awesome to get rid of all that, especially because we know that the new services and the new APIs, they're tested. These old APIs are not tested. So whenever we get bug reports, a lot of times it's, well, you're using the old APIs, and that might have issues with it. The next up is goods. We've talked about this with Umbraco Deploy and Courier. By the time we get to V8, we'll probably have goods for everything that we need goods for. The difference in that, though, for V8 is that we want goods to be a first-class citizen. That means that we'll have to reformat a bit of the database structure, maybe make the goods the primary key instead of the integers. These are all ideas and dreams. This might not definitely happen, because if we already have goods in there and it works, that might be enough. But the hope is that we can actually clean up the database a bit as well. But the one main thing that will change, and again, this will evolve until V8, is all the content services, content type services, you name it. Right now, a lot of them are based on IDs or integer IDs, so we'll have to update those to also support goods, and then we'll be obsoleting the integer IDs. Don't get me wrong, though, this doesn't mean that when you upgrade to version 8, that all of your code and everything dies. That's not true. The integers will remain there. You'll still be able to query by them. It will be fine, but they will become an obsoleted entity. The way that the database is structured is a lot of stuff is based on an Umbraco node table, which is fine, but then there's a lot of other tables in there that duplicate the Umbraco node fields in themselves, even though they reference Umbraco node. So we're going to streamline that. Whatever should be an Umbraco node will become an Umbraco node. Whatever is already one will reduce the overlap of fields that don't need to be there. Yes, I just said that. Examine v2, I've been talking about this for like 2 years. And the reason why it's not released yet is because Lucene 2 has lots of breaking changes. We can't just put Lucene 2 into Umbraco now because it will break all of your code. So we have to wait until version 8 is out. But what Examine v2 fixes, it doesn't really fix what Examine has now, but it enhances it. Of course, it uses the new Lucene, which has a lot more APIs that you can use. But with Examine v2, we have something called a strongly typed structure. So if you use Examine now, you can create a search result, or you can create a search, and then you get a search result back. In some cases, you might have to cast that search result to a different type of search result to get at the fields. Same goes with the searchers and the indexers. A lot of times there's a casting involved. We've gotten rid of that because everything is sort of a generic in Examine v2. So if you get a search result back from a specific type of searcher, it might include a lot more properties than a different one. Better Fluent API. Right now, it doesn't really support a lot of nested grouping. With v2, it absolutely supports nested grouping. Facets are out of the box. Right now, you can do facets in Examine v1 using some packages, and if you want to fiddle around with it, it can definitely work, but out of the box, we'll have facets in there. And the cool part that I like about this is right now, Examine config it's a bit annoying. It's There's lots of fields everywhere. There's a lot of stuff you need to do, and it would just be much easier to create indexes on startup with C# because it's a lot more intuitive to do so. So by default, Examine v2 will be configured by code. We'll still support the config way, but to do it via code is just way more fluent, way more flexible, and it gives you some better APIs. IOC and dependency injection. A lot of people get scared about this because a lot of people were scared about what we did in v5 with that. The reality is that everything is sort of going IOC and dependency injection. Think ASP.NET 5 is built on IOC and dependency injection. That said, we're not going to force this on you or anything like that. We're just going to use this internally in the core. That means better practices for coding internally, better testing for coding internally, and it's actually faster. So internally, we're using this for all these resolvers that we actually use for plugins. So if you have a plugin like a property editor or a startup item, you can get anything that's in the container injected into your constructor, which is really great. That means you don't have to use singleton accessors, and you can unit test your own code way better. The cool part is this container by default will also power MVC and Web API. You can override that with your own controller, absolutely. It's not going to get in the way, but by default, it means you can have dependency injection in all of your controllers just when you install Umbraco. You can modify this container. You can use this container in your own code if you want. You cannot replace this container, though. That's the only caveat. So for plugins and everything, we're using our own container. The reason is because we don't want to start abstracting IOC and dependency injection. That gets really ugly, and we've been down that road before. So you can use your own container for your own stuff, but this container will still be used for our internals. Another question people might ask of why we're using something called light inject instead of something like autofac. And that's because we don't want to get in your way of the way you develop. If you want to use autofac, great. We don't want to ship with autofac for a specific version that you might not want to use. We're going to use light inject. It's a very lightweight IOC engine. It's actually faster than most of the rest, but it's not going to interfere with what you use. So that's why we've gone ahead and chosen light inject. In version 8, we're going to have better memory usage. And this is because the way that we cache objects right now. An example is iContent has a reference to iTemplate as its property. When we cache an iContent object, it also caches the iTemplate object, even though when we look up an iTemplate object in the services, it returns a different version of it. And that's called deep object graphs. That's kind of an oversight when we developed the services API a long time ago, but we're going to change that. So instead of returning the actual template as part of the iContent, we return the template ID, and then you can go look up that template with the services, which is basically how it should have been from the beginning, but it does mean that we don't have these giant object graphs put into memory. Next up, le cache nouveau. I don't know if you guys have heard this term before, but our good friend Stefan has been working on a new cache. So instead of that XML cache, we can plug in our own cache layer and use whatever we want. Stefan's also French, so that fits, right? It's going to be much faster because we're not going to be caching strings. We're also not going to have to look up and serialize, deserialize strings to objects every time we do any queries. The actual objects that are stored as iPublish content are going to be the ones cached. So whenever you do iterations in your views, this is going to be pretty much instantaneous. It's going to be super flexible. Out of the box, I'm not even sure yet what we're going to be shipping with, but the XML cache will still work as a default if you want to upgrade. But I mean, the sky's the limit if you really want to replace this with something crazy. Neo4j, if you wanted. Maybe, I don't know. XSLT will still be supported, but we still don't want you to use it. But it'll work. It'll probably be a bit slower because it won't be working off a native XML document. So Stefan, high five, you're up. I don't know where you are. There he is. We use something called Petapoco in the core for our data access layer, but we're going to replace that with something called NPOCO. Reason is because Petapoco hasn't been developed or even touched on GitHub since 2012, so it's quite a while ago. NPoco has commits as recent as last week, and it's just the predecessor to it. It's got lots of different bugs fixed, and in fact, we've actually contributed last year to NPoco's repository because we found a big memory leak in Petapoco. So we fixed that in our core, and we committed that to NPoco, which they've put into there. They also have better memory usage, so even that memory fix that we've put in, they've enhanced that memory fix in their own, so it'll actually use less memory. They have way more extensibility points, and they support a lot more sort of data access that ORM or micro-ARM should support. It does also support change tracking, which is something that we might want, but might not want, because that adds a bit of complexity. But the thing is, if we ship with this, if you guys want to use change tracking with NPoco, then by all means, you can. The other thing we're going to do is ship with all the latest libraries. And the reason why V8 is important and the reason why it's an 8.0 major version is because we need to ship with these libraries. Most of these libraries have breaking changes in them. So ASP.NET 4.6 doesn't have breaking changes, but we don't want to upgrade 7.x to that quite yet. AutoMapper does have breaking changes because back in the day, they decided to change a minor version to be signed, which actually breaks all assembly references. So we're still stuck on a few versions behind because we can't upgrade until version 8. I don't know how many people hate that we ship a custom log for net version. Only a few, but I suppose more people in the world do. We're going to ship with the real log for net version so that you don't have to have any headaches when you reference another project. Again, that's a breaking change that we can't support with 7.x. JSON.NET, we'll make sure that's upgraded to the latest. Mini Profiler, upgraded to the latest. We also can't do that right now because it has breaking changes. Lucene 2.0 or 3.0. Lucene 4 might actually be out by the time we get to version 8. So if it is, we'll release with that. The new jQuery also has breaking changes. We'll make sure that's in there. And I know you guys all love URL rewriting.net, which is like 500 years old and full of bugs that never get fixed because it hasn't been worked on since that. We're not going to ship with that anymore. I don't know if you know this yet. IIS rewriting is basically taking precedence over this. If anyone's still using URL rewriting.net, I highly recommend using IIS rewriting. It's much more efficient, effective, tested. It doesn't have bugs. So it's a one less assembly that we can ship with. So those are sort of the technical awesome implementation details of version 8. These are sort of the end user awesome versions, implementation details. Segmentation we talked about 2 code gardens ago, I think. And this is sort of personalization for Umbraco. The way it works, it's actually relatively simple. A request comes in, you analyze the request, you tag the request with a bunch of metadata that you can use during the request, so like in your views. It could be anything, and this is all provider driven, so you can add your own segmentation providers to it. It could be anything based on the request. It could be members data, it could be any header that's in the request, it could be query strings, it could be the path, it could be the domain, whatever. But basically what we do is when we tag a request with a segment, it's by string, so that in your views, you can then just check if I want to render a certain block of code based on if this request has this segment. Things like a member's data, like their location, maybe their purchase history if they're a valued customer, or their last login time if you want to remind them that they can get a discount on something in the future. As I said, you can create your own. So just like all the other plugins in Umbraco, it would follow the same principles. You can create one, and it'll show up in the back office. You'll be able to enable, disable segments and providers. Just like you do today, it'll be quite simple. The next one is called variations. Again, we talked about this 2 years ago. And we can't get it into 7.x because of the breaking changes. Until then, there's things like Vordo and other things that try to fix the one-to-one language mappings. Whoops. Nobody saw that. So what we do is we say any languages that are in your Umbraco install, you can then create a one-to-one language mapping for it. We call them virtual nodes. They have their own ID, both integer and good, so you can still look them up as if they're a real node, because they actually are, but we store them underneath something called a master. So we have a master and then virtual. So they don't show up in your tree, they just show up as a one-to-one variant when you're editing your content. The tricky part of this is that it also needs to be stored in cache. There's things with language fallbacks. If you haven't created a language variant for one specific document, what happens? When you start iterating over .children, what children are you getting? Are you getting the children of the current culture, et cetera, et cetera? So there's a lot of crazy implementation details there. And the reason why this is mostly breaking is due to some database changes and the way that the cache handles it. And also, it definitely impacts how XSLT works. Because if we did this today, we would have to store these virtual nodes in the XML document, which means if you said .children in XSLT, you'll get all sorts of random variants. So that's coming in V8. So this is the beyond version. And it's some of my crazy ideas. These are things that I've been working on even in the past year, just some crazy thoughts that I've had, some prototypes that I've made, and stuff that I hope that we can get done post V8 or even during the road to V8. Package migrations is an idea that I came up with, I guess, during this year. And the idea is when you install a package for Umbraco, you always have to do this through the back office. And then it executes things called package actions, which might modify your config files. It might do all sorts of different things. The problem is we have this Umbraco package format, and now people are also installing packages via NuGet. Now we need to make this one system that works for everything. That's sort of my dream. What I want to do is I want to be able to install, say, like my package Articulate. I want to install it in Visual Studio via NuGet. When I start Umbraco, I want the data that I wanted to install with Articulate already in there, or somehow to get in there. Currently, the way it works is you install Articulate, it does a refresh, it then loads this custom user control. In the background of that user control, it actually installs the data. That's a massive hack, but that's the only way that you can do that to date. So what we're going to do is, inside of your DLLs, you're going to have another plugin called a package action. It'll follow the same principles as the core. The way our migrations work when you upgrade, we have package actions for the core. They've already been created so that you can tag your package actions for your own packages. So what we want to do is detect this on startup. Do you have a package action that doesn't match the latest version that we have tagged in the database? If so, we'll launch the installer. Now, this is just my idea. I'm sure there's better ways to do this, but for now, if we detect that a package needs upgrading, we'll launch the installer with a different screen that says, these packages need upgrading, click next, they'll install, and then away you go. So the first iteration of package migrations that I've been working on basically does this. So when you install Articulate, it installs via NuGet, installs in your Visual Studio, you control F5, launch the website, it'll say, this hasn't run any package migrations. It'll go to the installer, you click next, and it installs all your Articulate data. The cool part about this is that that's a NuGet package. There's nothing stopping us from taking that NuGet package and installing it in the back office in the exact same way. With the same exact package migrations, the same exact code, you didn't have to change anything. It'll work both in Visual Studio and in the back office seamlessly without you having to worry about anything. Because when we install in the back office, a NuGet's just a zip. We just read the zip. It'll have a manifest in there for all the Umbraco bits, just the same manifest that's in our current packages, and then it detects package migrations and runs them. So we could basically make one NuGet package that works in Visual Studio and in the back office, and it would be exactly the freaking same, which would be super cool. Thanks. The cool part about this is that the code's already up there. So you can go have a look at this branch. It's already in the Umbraco core. I've been working on it. It more or less works. There's a few things that need some work, but it's already there. But beyond just this idea, you can imagine, let's say you are a studio and you say, well, when I create a new project, I have these NuGet files. They install my baseline data, they install this package, this package, this package, they reference this package, this package, and this package. So when developer XYZ says, okay, install my studio package, it installs everything. Umbraco, you name it, and then all of Umbraco's packages. And then when you control F5, Umbraco installs, and then also installs all the package migrations for all those projects. And there you go. And then whenever you want to update that, you just go make a new NuGet of one of those packages so that when you start a new project, you're already up to date. So that is my crazy idea, my crazy goal. I think it would be really awesome. Yeah. LinkPad, I don't know who uses LinkPad. Am I over time, by the way?
Yes. Yeah.
Ah.
20 minutes.
Really? Why didn't you yell at me?
I was hand signaling.
Oh, you need to hand signal louder. Okay, I won't do any demos. LinkPad, there's a LinkPad provider, handy for running scripts, not web-based operations. It already exists. But what's really cool in 7.3, we have an instructions table, which means that you could potentially create instructions via the LinkPad provider, which would auto-publish things when you start your website. I haven't tested it yet, should work. iQueryable for the LinkPad provider is something I've been working on. Again, all the code's there. If you haven't used the LinkPad provider, you should totally check it out. I was going to demo it, but I won't. You can see me after. It's really awesome. Nope. I have this other cool repo you can check out called Umbraco scripts. It's where I just chuck all my nonsensical thoughts down when I create them. It's got some LinkPad scripts for Umbraco, some load testing scripts with the help of Stefan, SQL scripts for Umbraco, and just a bunch of web sort of hacks and stuff. So I'm going to keep this up to date. If anyone's interested in what I put there, they might be helpful. I'll watch Twitter, and if something comes up that I think is useful, I'll put it there. ASP.NET 5, I didn't realize it was going to go for so long. I've already started ASP.NET 5 development. I got to spend a weekend with the ASP.NET core team last year at the summit, which was super awesome. We made a prototype, and I revisited that prototype a couple weeks ago and have updated the code since. In order to get to ASP.NET 5, we need to make V8, because we need to get rid of that legacy code. There's no other way, because the legacy code will not work whatsoever with ASP.NET 5. So once we get to V8, moving to ASP.NET 5 will be much, much easier. I have conveniently made this repo, which you can have a look at. It's a prototype. It actually is Umbraco routing based on a file system structure with JSON data, but the full routing is in place. Even hijacked routes are in place. Surface controller postbacks are in place. All that stuff is there. And the code is literally micro compared to what was required for MVC currently. So it's quite interesting, but you can follow along. I'll just be updating that when, I don't know, I have spare time. That's it.